Hertfordshire, who moved to China in the year 1938 and went on to both observe and to play a unique role in China's war effort. He's the subject of CGTN's new documentary, Witness to War, produced in association with SACU. To launch this extraordinary film, I'd now like to welcome back to the stage the Deputy Consul General, Yangwen Zheng, Zoe Reid, the Chair Emerita of SACU, Mayan, Managing Director of CGTN Europe, and Mark Thomas, George Hogg's nephew, and the author of Blades of Grass, the story of George Aylwin Hogg. Director May, if I could ask you to say a few words to mark the moment of this official launch.
So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Many people ask me why we chose Liverpool to hold the event, and the answer is simple. Because we have a Chinese community here that has a story that's been deeply sad and incredibly brave. 3 years ago, CGTN embarked the journey, started to do the story, and produced a documentary called Secret Betrayal. And I want to take this moment to thank you, all the Chinese descendants of Chinese merchant seamen here in Liverpool, for your tremendous contribution and support to our production. And this film actually has won International New York Film Festival Television and Film Award in 2023. But I think the most importantly is it brought your voices to the international stage, and also the recognition they deserve. So I want to take the opportunity to thank you, and I want to say the award is really not really ours. Actually, it was yours. So thank you so much. And also now I want to introduce, I'm very excited actually to introduce the second documentary CGTN Europe has done on World War II. The name is Witness to War, and I hope you all enjoy it. Thank you so much.
It was 1938. George Hogg, a British Oxford graduate, set out to travel the world. In China, he found a country at war.
When George Hogg arrived in Shanghai in 1938, there had been a terrible battle fought between the Japanese military and the Chinese military over the northern districts of Shanghai. It was the most vicious battle of World War II.
It was a war where China stood alone.
It's undeniable that China has played a very important and somewhat neglected role in the history of World War II. China held down millions of Japanese troops who were unable to then occupy other parts of Asia and contribute to the building of the Japanese Empire.
What George Hogg saw changed him forever.
He never saw China except in wartime. What he was looking at all around him was poverty and suffering and war and destruction.
Conditions in Shanghai are appalling. The Japanese army has burned down surrounding villages and bayoneted the farmers. So the city is full of hungry and homeless folk who watch each other become thinner and colder until they die. The Japanese flag flies everywhere. Shanghai is in tattered ruins. The streets are strewn with dead Chinese soldiers lying as they fell.
I think what he saw was 我看到一个新中国. It was in his mind's eye. It was seeing the spirit of the people that made him believe that there would be a new China.
As a war reporter, he told the outside world about a war they didn't know was happening.
Today and yesterday have been very heavy. Terrific air raids on the cities Wuchang and Hanyang across the river. and about 3 miles at either end of Hankou. Afterwards, we all go out in different directions to get the news and take pictures. It is both grueling and gruesome.
He was a teacher. He was a hero. A forgotten story.
When you think back to George's life, he was really a wise friend and noble friend of China.
The story of George Hogg in China.
Ladies and gentlemen, a taste there of Witness to War, George Hogg in China. And I'm delighted to say that Mark has a few gifts here which will be retained as a goodwill gesture by China Media Group in memory of his extraordinary uncle. First, a special presentation box containing facsimiles of a number of documents of George Hogg's archive, including, by the way, the letters that he wrote home to his parents, articles that he wrote for the Manchester Guardian, as it was known in those days, his collection of lyrics of China Industrial Cooperative songs, as well as the letters written by CIC to his parents after his death. Now, I think you've also got copies of George Hogg's book, I See a New China, in both English and Mandarin, as well as a copy of his own book, Blades of Grass, the story of George Aylwin Hogg. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we can't allow such an extraordinary and historic gathering to take place here with so many wonderful people. So we're going to take a few photographs, I think, now. So I'd like to invite everyone in the front row, if I might, onto the stage for some photographs to mark this historic moment. If everyone from Ana Palacio to Sir Sherard Cooper-Coles could stand in the front of 2 rows, and everyone else to fill in from the back. Thank you very much. If I could ask you to come up now, and the usual safety warnings, as you have to say in all public gatherings now, do take care when leapfrogging over the front, and wait for one of our helpful floor managers if you want a hand over, who will generously come and help you. Ladies and gentlemen, feel free to take any photographs of your friends and family while we take part in this. Please take your seats and be careful as you leave the stage once again. Thank you so much. And the same advice again, please take your time as you re-enter the seating area. Thank you very much. I hope you understand that we're recording some things from this evening's event, so forgive the moments of musical chairs where we're moving the stage around, we're moving cameras around. Don't think you've walked into the wrong theatre or anything like that, but just bear with us as we fiddle with bits of tech stuff. I promise when you see it, if you see it, you'll completely understand. I think now we're ready to go, and perhaps this is a good moment, ladies and gentlemen, to dig a little deeper into China's role in the Second World War. So it's a very great pleasure to welcome to the stage now the historian and sinologist, Dr. Francis Wood, the author and historian, Dr. Robert Lyman, and Yangwen Zheng, Professor of Chinese History at the University of Manchester. Would you give them a round of applause, please? Thank you very much. I have to say the same thing again. Take your time, ladies and gentlemen, as you take your seats. Imagine the paperwork if anything went wrong with the most distinguished historians in the United Kingdom. Wonderful to see you. Thank you so much, and we're delighted you're here. Professor, let me start with you, Professor Zheng. China, in many ways, the forgotten ally, that's the phrase constantly repeated, the forgotten ally of the Second World War. How would you characterize its role in the conflict?
I think China played a significant role which we historians have not even begun to study. And that's why I'm here. I'm here to make a plea for hopefully to get some funding, to train PhD students. Britain needs to invest in education, in Chinese history education. So I don't know whether I answered your question, but Robert and Francis could answer them as well.
You did, and I'm sure vice-chancellors around the country are quaking at your words. Francis, why, let's ask that then, why is this largely forgotten, certainly in the West anyway?
I think it's the question of what comes afterwards. And I think at the time there was just a very serious political wish to keep China rather out of it. I mean, people were not interested. You get the Korean War, China sort of fades from our memory. But I would like to kind of bring back the fact that during the war, I mean, people in Britain felt incredibly strongly for China. Something that's little known is that during the war, between about 1943 and 1946, British people, ordinary people, raised 160 million pounds to send to China for relief. I mean, people in Britain cared desperately about it. So ordinary people minded very much. They took a penny a week to work, they took a penny a week to school, they went to meetings, they attended special meals, they went to cinema. They raised a huge amount. They cared very much. But after the war, the politics of the world shut China out.
Robert, what's your take on this?
Well, I concur with my two learned friends. The reality is that China was the heart of the war. The East Asia War began and ended because of China. And it's a real travesty in my 40 years of studying the subject, how little we in the West know, but actually how few people in the East understand it as well. So we have a learning game ahead of us. All of us involved in this field need to do more. It was important because China was the heart of Japanese imperial ambitions, and we must not forget that. If we are fighting fascism, we're fighting imperialism, and China was the battleground of Japanese imperialism. And that's why it's so incredibly important. And it's incredibly important to understand also the Allied strategy. So there's a lovely slide there of Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill. The focus for Allied strategy from at the end of 1942 was to keep China in the war, to enable it to keep fighting. A terribly difficult thing to do when Japan had 1.1 million troops in China, and China was the focus of their ambitions, as I said. And one of the things I think we need to rebalance as historians, I know I'm speaking to friends here, we do get irritated by this. The war did not begin at Pearl Harbor. The war began in 1931. Many millions of Chinese had been killed by the time we even knew about it. So there's a sense of cognizant failure, dissonance even, over those years of not understanding what's going on. We need to open the doors and have a look inside.
Professor Zheng, do you think this is racism or cultural misunderstanding? I mean, have these played into Western attitudes towards China's role in the war? Is it easy and that simple?
Could be. I think Francis was saying because it was the Cold War after 1945 and the Civil War, so I think the Cold War kept each other busy. And then after that, it's the economic reform. People were busy making money. So I think it's really time. I'm talking from the perspective of a teacher. For my Modern China module, first year Chinese history module at Manchester, I have 180 students, and I teach about the Second World War. There's no reading. You know, you assign readings to students, there's nothing. So we need to study.
Is that because they can't read or there aren't enough books?
Because nobody has written much about the Second World War, the China theatre. And we didn't mention Michael Lindsay, because he was instrumental in Yan'an. Without him, I don't know how the communists would have gotten the message out. And we didn't talk about the Chinese expedition forces working with the British in Burma, liberating Burma. You know, some Chinese might have heard about the Renanqiang Dajie. Chinese forces, expedition forces, saved 7,000 British troops with 500 missionaries and journalists. Nobody talks about that. And nobody writes about it. So when I teach the module, teach World War China at War, you assign readings to students. There's no reading to assign. So it's really urgent for us to study.
Francis, do you agree there's an issue of cultural misunderstanding? I mean, it does rather continue to this day, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think, and also it goes back. I mean, I'm not so good about the Second World War. I wrote a book about the First World War.
Available in all good bookshops, by the way.
called Betrayed Ally. And during the First World War, China was desperate to join in and fight, and she was kept out of the war, largely by Japan. I mean, I think you were quite right to stress, I mean, yeah, Britain has always sort of, in a sense, sentimentally allied itself with Japan because of, you know, we've both got kind of, they've got an emperor, we've got a king, and this kind of thing, and Japanese princes come over here and learn, they study at the Naval College in Greenwich and so on, and sort of feel a sense of alliance, which, I mean, if you look at actually the hard facts of the First and the Second World War, it has absolutely no basis at all. I think it's a question of looking at the world in the wrong way, that China has not been given ever accorded the respect. Yeah, because again, it's like the seamen. You know, there's all this help, there's all this support going on, and it's just not written about. I mean, there are quite good books, but you've got to go back to the time. You know, people like Graham Peck and so on. But
primary sources. Yeah,
it's not stuff that you can find easily in Waterstones.
Yeah.
Professor Zheng, how is the Second World War viewed in China now? It's interesting that two of the biggest box office hits this summer in China are dramas set in the Second World War.
I think there's a renewal, there's a desire in China at the moment to understand the war, and which I had never seen before, maybe before it was the Cultural Revolution and economic reform. I think there's a desire today, so we need to ride on that tide and do more research. Yes,
Robert, let's talk about some specifics. Events like the Nanjing massacre, the bombing of Chongqing and Shanghai, especially devastating, and are known globally. How did atrocities like these shape both domestic morale and international perception of the conflict?
I think we need to remember that at the time of the Nanjing massacre in 1937, when at least 300,000 men, women and children were arbitrarily killed by the occupying power, the world didn't understand the scale of the terror that was being undertaken. Terror was a new form of warfare. And I have to say, many people then and now didn't believe it. And they didn't believe it because it's almost incomprehensible to think about this. This is why Hogg is so incredibly important. This is why history is so incredibly important, because we have lots of eyewitnesses from Nanjing in particular who saw exactly what was going on. And it wasn't as though the Japanese army, the Imperial Japanese army, was hiding what it was doing. There's a cognitive dissonance here in Japan. I've interviewed lots of Japanese veterans in the last 40 years, and a number of them, when I ask this question, I always ask the question, and did you see any atrocities? Not a single Japanese soldier saw a single atrocity. I know the Japanese army was incredibly disciplined, and we would never have done anything like that. So there's a matter of us, in terms of understanding, opening the door into China in the war. We all have to do it, those in Japan and those here as well.
Francis, do you think the West is ready to recognize China's role in the war? And if not, why?
It's a question of what you mean by the West. I think people are. The question of whether politicians are is yet another one. I mean, at the political level, there's still this extraordinary suspicion, mistrust, and so on. Really kind of very negative views of China. But I think lower down, people, I mean, I think to go back to, like all the people who raised money during the Second World War, they send their pennies to China, that ordinary people have a great sense of sympathy and understand and would love to hear more about, I think, the stories, of people like Horgan, but also the thinking of the Lisbon Marrow. I think that'll go a very long way to creating a popular support, whether it feeds upwards to the uninformed who govern us is another question.
Professor Zheng, what are the other key moments, if I can put it like that, in the conflict that are largely forgotten or perhaps were never even known about in the West?
For me, the most important is Michael Lindsay and the Chinese expedition forces to Burma, to India, 中国远征军. And there were thousands of them. They collaborated with the British. They broke one of the camps when the Japanese encircled the British, about 7,000 of them. That story needs to be written. And it's not, and I'm trying to get my students to write dissertations, MA dissertation, to do that. And to do PhD, you really need to go to the archives. You really need to go interview people, but I think most of them are gone by now. It's really sad. For us, you can't explain Burma theater without understanding the Chinese expedition forces. So that's, for me, that's the most important.
Well, look, this is a good moment to say that, talking of those forgotten moments, at least here in the West, one, you've mentioned the Lisbon Marrow incident, where the Japanese cargo liner carrying 1,800 British prisoners of war captured after the Battle of Hong Kong was torpedoed by the submarine USS Grouper on the 1st of August 1942. 1st of October 1942, hundreds of POWs were killed, but hundreds more were saved by Chinese fishermen. It's an extraordinary story told in the documentary, The Sinking of the Lisbon Marrow.
Are you going around and asking people about the boats?
我第一次听说里斯本湾是在2014年。
Mr. Fan,
it's a pleasure
delighted to meet you.
Finally, you and I are not that young anymore. This is probably the last opportunity
Sure.
for the whole world to hear their stories. 1912年10月2日，载有1816名英军战俘的里斯本湾，在途经中国东极岛海域时，被美军击沉。 他们的家人没能等到他们回家。
My memories of my father are very slight.
I was 9 years old when my father died.
I had to grow up without my dad.
I believe my father absolutely adored me.
在我们的寻访过程中，发现很多盟军战俘的家族墓地，只有他们的墓碑是空坟。
I'm sorry.
If those young boys in the East China Sea are still alive, we could have 800 such families.
I think that the Chinese fishermen risked their own very lives to rescue us. Yes, the Japanese could have destroyed their little village.
Thank you very much.
1943年初，英国外交部指控日军在鱼雷击中后的行为是一个现代文明国家在海军和军事传统上的耻辱。
日本回复英国政府的抗议，说他们指出的事实是捏造的，对于帝国的公正性是故意的诽谤。
Now he's tracking down relatives of the men who drowned by placing huge adverts in British newspapers.
82年过去了，当年到底发生了什么？
Ladies and gentlemen, the sinking of the Lisbon Marrow, an extraordinary yet largely forgotten story, as we've discussed. I'm delighted to say that we're joined tonight by descendants of some of those involved in that incident, including Anthony Jones, the grandson of one of the British servicemen involved, who's now the chairman of the Lisbon Marrow Memorial Association. Anthony, lovely to see you. We're delighted to have your company here. Why do you think that incident has flown under the radar in the West?
Well, I would first of all say that's quite a complex question, but because there's many reasons is the reality. If I'll just give a couple perhaps. First and foremost, there was so much going on at that time in the world. We've already mentioned several things in the Pacific, but all over the world there were so many major events that the reality is that the sinking of one troop ship just wasn't widely reported at the time. And then when the men did come back, many of them wouldn't talk about their experiences. For many, many years, for a couple of generations, they wouldn't want to speak about it because it would just be too painful for them. And indeed, some of them were told not to speak about their experiences, not to upset other people. And it was thanks to the likes of Brian Finch, who's here today, Tony Bannum and Fang Li, who made the documentary, that finally this story is getting out into the open and more people are starting to hear about it. And I'd like to say it's groups, organisations like Lyman, which is the Lisbon Marrow Memorial Association. It's now down to us, and it's our job to try and keep the memory of those men alive.
Round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's return to our panel here, Dr. Francis Wood, Dr. Robert Lyman, and Professor Yangwen Zheng. Professor, how has the view of China's role in the Second World War changed over the last 80 years, and why do you think that might be?
That's a tough question.
I know, but you're a professor.
I think because after the Civil War, 1949, the communist regime was founded, I think because of the Cold War, the antagonization, I think scholars had no time and people have no interest in such kind of things. I think the wealth and relative peace in the post-Mao era has brought out renewed interest, scholarly interest as well, because we see more scholarship on the Second World War in China, including Japanese forces in China. But there are lots of things that needs to be written right now.
Robert, I'm guessing it's historians and journalists who are to blame here.
No, I blame politicians for all of this. It's absolutely right. I think one of the extraordinary things in China I've seen over the last 10 years is a real desire to understand the deeper avenues and rivers of history in the country, and I applaud it. And I see it also in India as well, as a historian of the Far East. And I think it's absolutely right. There are some fantastic stories that we all need to pick up. I'm just going to go back to the Chinese Expeditionary Force in Burma in 1942 because it was exceptional. The Chinese Expeditionary Force saved the British Army in Burma. And there's a fantastic little anecdote which I like telling my students. The British Army in Burma in 1942 was commanded by General Sir Harold Alexander. And at the end of the final battle at a place called Yananyang on the Irrawaddy, he wanted to be able to award the Japanese general, General Sun, with a British award. He had no authority to do so, so he got his ADC and he took some scissors and he cut off the CBE ribbon on his own tunic and awarded it to General Sun. And it was finally agreed by Buckingham Palace that he might do so. Those are the stories that we want to hear because they're true. I mean, the Burma Army, the British Army Burma, would not have escaped had it not been for the 30,000 men of the 5th and 6th Chinese Expeditionary Force divisions. And I think these are stories that would make brilliant movies as well, by the way. So if there's anyone in the media, anyone in the Chinese media here, that's a really fantastic story. And you've got two authorities on the war in Burma who could help you.
I can write the script for you.
Francis, do you think this global focus on this 80th anniversary of the end of the war is perhaps helping to get the message out, or are we forgetting because they're now dying, they've gone, that generation?
I know. I think it's true. It's sadly true. But there are so many. I mean, it's not that far back, is it? I mean, yeah, people are as old as me. My parents were in the war. They were in Bletchley, failing to decode codes. But I think there are enough people around who are, the children of those who participated, and who have a lot of things. I think there are more things and objects and things that can help us remember. So I think there's a lot of hope that the First World War is far too far gone, but now we should, and we should make an enormous effort to use every possible means to salvage the memories of those, what they remembered of their parents, even if the parents didn't say something. That is in itself a significant fact. If your parents wouldn't speak about the horrors of war, then we need to get round behind and understand why.
Professor Zheng, earlier this year, I interviewed Joe Bohr, the author of the book Should the World Fear China? And in that book, he wrote that China needs to overcome its lingering victimhood to fulfill its international responsibilities. I mean, would you agree with that? Would you go along with that, seen through the prism of its role in the Second World War?
I suppose I agree that China can move forward. China should move forward. We should move forward, but not forgetting what happened. But to move forward, you need to know what happened. And what happened is what matters to me as a historian, as a lecturer who teaches every day. And we need sources, and we need books and articles, and that can only be done by research.
And it will make a wonderful sort of, I mean, it's a challenge to the Opium War. It's from the Opium War that you get that sort of perpetual victim idea. But I mean, the Second World War, as you both say, there are such positive things. What China actually did achieve, and so on. At least we have got something very...
I think China has, in some ways, moved beyond that. I think so.
We're beginning with all these stories that come out.
And this is one of the events that to educate and inform the public.
Roberts, how did China's resistance impact Allied strategies in the Pacific, and what about in Europe? If nothing else, I guess, it allowed the Soviet forces to focus on the Western campaign.
It did, absolutely. It was incredibly important. I mean, I can't exaggerate enough the importance of China staying in the war and holding down the Japanese army along the Yellow River, as we call it, because otherwise those troops would have been elsewhere. And we need to remember that the reason why the war began in the Pacific in 1941 was because of the Japanese inability to successfully prosecute the war in China. Now, that's a message that I try to preach, because it's really important for modern Chinese to realize how much they had held the Japanese down militarily. The Japanese were unable to achieve their strategic goals in China, and it's for that reason that they lashed out against the Americans. And I think, strategically, it was incredibly important at all the major conferences from 1942 onwards. Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill had a special focus on keeping China, and indeed in one of them, the Chinese leader, Kuomintang leader, attended in Tehran. And that's incredibly important. We can't ignore China from the overall global strategy of the war.
So, Professor Zheng, how do you think then China's wartime experience then lays the groundwork for the establishment of the People's Republic of China?
I think the victory really encouraged the Red Army or the PLA, and I think it's really important in the way that, because they survived. That's the most important thing. They survived. The Red Army, the PLA survived. The Kuomintang, despite heavy loss, China survived, was not conquered by Japan, and that in itself is victory, although at huge cost.
Francis, your thoughts on that?
Oh, I agree very much. I think that's a very interesting pivotal point, that moment. Thinking about discussions going on in Peking, and so, you do really have the sense that, that the communist leaders knew that they were on a roll, really. Yeah. I mean, despite everything that Russia was doing to them, pinching everything in Manchuria and so on, I mean, there was a very strong sense, as you say, because of the victory. I mean, that was fantastic. I mean, if you think from Yan'an, you know, and then to look, and, you know, Japan has gone from China. It's from a tiny sort of seed you get to this enormous movement. I think it was vitally important.
But the nature of the war also changes. It's important to remember this in 1945, when people recognized that the Japanese had been defeated, there was unfinished business. One of the things that people don't realize is there's a great transference of resources from the Kuomintang to the PLA. And that enabled the Mao Zedong in large part to be successful. And actually, when you look at the Korean War, a large number of the professional soldiers fighting in the Chinese armies had served in the Kuomintang.
Yes.
Let's bring our audience in here, because we have so many distinguished guests. I'm keen for you to have your say. The usual format, if you'd like to ask a question, put your hand up and we'll run a camera and a microphone to you. Tell us who you are and where you're from and your question, please. Who wants to go first? Who's going to shove their hand up? There's a lady right in the back there. This is your opportunity to sign up for the modern history course, by the way. This is a recruitment effort. PhD students welcome as well. Hello, welcome. Tell us your name and where you're from and your question, please.
My name's Jean Clements, and I am one of the relatives of the men who sadly died on the Lisbon Maru. My question seems to be, I don't know how we are meant to make a transition for media coverage. I'm finding it very difficult and to get some media coverage within our local communities about China's involvement. We have funded, myself and my cousin and the Lisbon Maru Memorial Association, an annual award to a local school. The media won't even cover it, and I don't know why or how we can move forward. And, you know, and especially if you keep saying about publications, I think when people are writing things, I don't think that here in the West, they're actually very open to publishing things, and I just don't know how we're meant to move forward.
Thank you very much. Well, let me put that then to Robert. Robert, just pick that one up, and then I'm going to come to you, sir, in the front row here. Robert, a quick response on that.
Don't give up. Keep on talking. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've been talking about how China needs to embrace the war, the world needs to embrace China's role in the war, and it's taken a long time for the penny to drop in many quarters. Keep on going. Unfortunately, a lot of publications, even in academia, academics driven by a particular scoring system, but most writing is driven by money, I'm afraid. But we have fantastic stories to tell. Keep on talking.
There are many documentary makers here tonight as well. They're the affluent ones in good suits, by the way. But we should talk later. Gentleman on the front here, who I think is Sherard Cooper-Coles, I can see in the front. A very great pleasure to have you here.
No, well, it's a huge pleasure to be here and to be sitting next to the Lord Mayor of this great city, which has connected Britain with the world in so many different ways.
These are the expensive seats just in the front row.
No. And I shall be back here at the Labour Party conference in the end of September. And one of the things I want to do there is speak to the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, about the need for, in British schools and the British curriculum, an A-level in Chinese history and civilization. Our ignorance of Chinese history, of an economy which for 20 of the past 25 centuries of human history has been the largest in the world, is appalling. Yeah. I studied classics at school, and I remember we had at my school in the south of England a master who did cricket and a little bit of history on the side. But he said to us, "You're wasting your time studying Greece and Rome. You need to understand China and Chinese history and Chinese civilization." Yeah. And this man put on a year's course teaching us about the rise of the Communist Party, about China's sufferings in the war, about Sun Yat-sen and the Chinese Republic, and I've never forgotten that. And I just want to endorse what our three distinguished academics were saying and enlist their support in a campaign for a Chinese, an A-level in Chinese history and civilization in every British school, because we need to correct that deficit. And I just would like to know your comments really on how we get this delivered.
Francis, you go first. Yes, Francis.
It's no good asking me how we get it delivered. I'm just enormously in favour of it being delivered. There have been moments, I mean, I used to go and teach about the Cultural Revolution. There was a bit in 1O level, but it requires teachers' enthusiasm as well, I think. We need to get them keen.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to move on because we have so many other people to talk to, but I have to say you've been an absolutely wonderful panel. Dr. Francis Wood, Dr. Robert Lyman and Professor Yangwen Zheng. Round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of the war, and while China clearly played a vital role, it didn't take long after VJ Day for anti-Chinese sentiment in the West to rise significantly. We were in Liverpool a few years back to make our documentary, as director May-Ann mentioned earlier on, The Secret Betrayal, which tells the story of the forced repatriation of scores of Chinese nationals who helped the war effort right here in the city of Liverpool, working on merchant navy ships for the duration of the conflict.
A convoy at sea, one of the lifelines upon which the United Nations war effort relied.
The story of the North Atlantic convoys and their heroic sailors has become part of British national identity. Less well known is that more than 1 in 7 of the merchant seamen who risked their lives crewing the convoys were Chinese, and that when the war ended, their loyal service was rewarded with betrayal.
When we got to the end of the war and the Englishmen were coming back and wanted the jobs back, they had a secret Home Office meeting where it was discussed in Whitehall what to do about the Chinese merchant seamen, and they decided they would round them up and forcibly repatriate them.
That particular night, they went round all the sort of chip shops, the dry cleaners, and the mahjong place where they used to play mahjong, the games places, picked them all up, put them into vans, drove them down to the docks, took them out into the Mersey, put them into boats.
This is the story of a 70-year shame which the British government has only now acknowledged but still not apologised for. A story of lives blighted by lies and loss.
I think it's what happened to our parents, the children that were left behind, that is the biggest travesty. You know, they are British children that the British government knew full well existed. They knew they'd deported the dads and left the mums without means to pay the bills, and yet that didn't bother them any more than it did to deport the men.
They have to go because we don't need them anymore. The country don't need them anymore.
Keith never met his father, but eventually discovered he had family in China he'd never seen until 12 years ago, when he had a visit from a Chinese nephew, the son of a half-brother Keith never knew he had.
He was my brother's son, who was training to be a lawyer, and had come to Manchester to do a special course. So I met him.
What did you say to him?
I just asked him how things were and one thing and another, and that my brother wanted to come over here, and I said, well, I'll try and see what I can do, but the mystery deepens, he disappeared.
Your dad will be proud of all the work that you've done, surely.
I would hope so.
For brothers like Joe and John, it's not just the loss that feels so wrong to them. It's the realization they and their mothers had been deceived into believing the men had just abandoned them.
If you could meet him now, what would you say to him?
Well, I'd give him a big hug first and say, I'm sorry that this happened to you. We couldn't do anything about it. But we can now. We want the truth. Own up to what they did and let us settle. We're not got that many years left in us. But we just want the truth.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, Keith Coughlin, who you saw in that film, passed away since I filmed with him. He died still waiting for that apology. Just this past weekend here in Liverpool, many of the surviving relatives of those brave men were joined by the Chinese Consul General Tang Rui at a special memorial service.
This year marks the 80th anniversary of the victory of the Chinese People's War of resistance against Japanese aggression and the World Anti-Fascist War, with immense sacrifice of 35 million military and civilian casualties.
Closer to home, you represent the memory of another tragedy, which is also becoming recognised, of the merchant seamen who served in the North Atlantic, Arctic and other convoys which supplied the Allies. More than 1 in 7 were Chinese.
This plaque commemorates the eventful years during which Chinese seamen fought side by side with the British Navy and people against fascism. With extraordinary courage and enormous sacrifice, they composed a moving chapter of China and Britain sharing a common destiny.
I'm the granddaughter of one of the seamen who was secretly deported in 1946. And it wasn't just that they served our country well throughout World War II. It was the fact that they had families, that they were settled here, and they just vanished as far as our families were concerned.
We at CGTN Europe were deeply moved by this story, by the sorrow of children and grandchildren left behind, by the lasting harm of racial discrimination, but also by the pride of knowing that Chinese and British sailors once stood together in the fight against tyranny.
Here we are now, 80 years later, and our families are still trying to find answers because, believe it or not, 80 years later, not one of us knows where our grandfathers or fathers ended up.
It is our duty to tell the story, not to stir resentment, but to let the truth speak, to honor the bonds of comradeship between our peoples, and to confront discrimination and to foster understanding.
All these years later, we still need to find out where those men actually were. Our families would like to lay flowers on our relatives' graves, not just at a plaque on the pier head. And we won't stop searching until we actually do find where they went.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honoured to tell you that we are joined tonight by many of the relatives who continue to work to try to shine a light on a shameful moment in post-war Britain. If you are able to, would you please stand so we could applaud you? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. To all of you, thank you very much indeed for coming. It's time now to look to the present and indeed the future, 80 years on from the end of the war, and to consider how the events and outcomes of 8 decades are still resonating today. I'm delighted to say that we're now joined by Ana Palacio, Spain's former foreign minister, and again Peter Megeschi, the former Prime Minister of Hungary. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for joining us. Ana, many of the international groups that shaped the war and the world order after the war, the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, are looking, some might say, increasingly shaky perhaps, especially as the global south, including China, tries to get its voice heard. What's your take on that 80 years on with the current military build-up in Europe and elsewhere, President Trump's tariffs threatening globalization? Is the global world order built after the war still relevant?
First, thank you for the question. This is the 100 million because of inflation question. First, I think that we have to remember, and this is what the 30s tell us, is that the alternative is not benign. The alternative is sheer power. And yes, I think that institutions, and I will speak as former Senior Vice President General Counsel of the World Bank Group, I know that it doesn't make sense in the world of today that there are 9 Europeans sitting on the board of the World Bank, deciding what the policies of the World Bank are. 9 Europeans out of 26. Doesn't make sense today. And this has consequences in the purpose. For instance, I will not elaborate, but certain restrictions to energy policy that for Africa do not make sense. We Europeans, we buy gas from Mozambique, but the World Bank cannot finance power-generated gas from Mozambique, although we use the gas from Mozambique to make power. This is an example. This doesn't make sense, and we have to understand that legitimacy comes from inclusion, and that I think that relevance comes from reflecting the needs of the world.
Peter, where do we really stand now here in 2025? Where would you say we stand? Are these institutions built after the Second World War going to continue? Will they endure?
You know, the power relations is changed fundamentally, and that have to be recognized. Have to realizing in the structure of UN and the other institutions. And now is not relevant what is the situation and what is the actual structure. And I think this is also a question of the competition. A question of the competition between the powers. And I think we have to accept this change. The competition, as I said in my small introduction, is good. Have to accept and not to fighting against, but enjoy the results of the competitions.
Anna, what do you think the past tells us about the present and the future of global relations? Is there anything to be learned from this past 80 years?
Absolutely. Especially from China. China is a fantastic example, and there was an intervention on learning about China, learning about Chinese civilization. It reminded me Eleanor Roosevelt's memoirs. Eleanor Roosevelt was heading the American delegation to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And she refers how Dr. P.C. Chang, of course, he was representing Chiang Kai-shek, nationalist China, but he said at a certain moment, she tells, and suddenly Dr. Chang was really, and he said, the Secretariat should learn Confucianism, and of course should learn Confucianism, because Peter, you're absolutely right, we have to reach agreements. And China has this fantastic, when you read about those that were present at the creation, and this is a sentence that President Xi Jinping uses now, because China is now much more comfortable with this duality of humiliation, but at the same time being a key actor of the post-World War II. And yes, it was a Western dominated, and yes, we have to rebalance security with freedom. We have to rebalance individualism with the importance of the group. But this debate is there from the beginning, from Bretton Woods, in the San Francisco debates, and China had a very strong voice that China has just withdrawn from for many years, and that China now is recovering this, being comfortable with saying, yes, we were key actors, yes, we were there, and frankly, today, China is trying to lead the reform that is needed.
Peter, we know about the increasing global trade tensions. We know about the rise of the far right across much of Europe, and a raft of emerging countries demanding their voices are heard. Is it now time to rethink the world order cemented 8 decades ago?
Yes, it is the time. Not so easy to answer to this question, how to do, because this is the question. Practically, everybody is agree that have to create a new world order, but how to do that? I think the right way to recognize the reality, because the reality show that always the weak doesn't like the competition, and the strong like very much the competition. If you look 20, 30 years ago, United States was very much pro the competition because it was the strongest. In the time, changed the situation, and now China is very close to United States. United States doesn't like the competition today. Want to defend the economy and to put the taxes and everything. And I think the most important to recognize the reality.
Anna, if this new reality is going to happen, how is it going to happen? Is it going to be the work of politicians or academics? It's difficult to imagine agreement breaking out around the world.
I'm an incrementalist. I think realism is the key word. And frankly, today, we have to understand that by United States withdrawing from the role that United States has played of inspiring and fostering this world order that we had, there is an opportunity that China is betting on. Clearly, when you see the policy of the President Xi Jinping and the present government, it's clear China is leading this idea that we need to keep the essence, because what we cannot just go back to the 30s where aggression, just aggression without any justification, and Manchuria is a key example, just is rewarded. And this is where United States, because Roosevelt plays a key role in the 40s, United States now doesn't. So I think that China has a great opportunity to lead this idea of inclusiveness, of responsibility, of just being relevant for the problems of today. And governance, as I mentioned the World Bank, because I know the institution very well, but it's true of the Security Council, it's true of United Nations, it's true everywhere. We need to address it in an honest way, and we need critical mass. When you say the global south, you say the rest of the world. We need this critical mass, and we need this critical mass, and let's hope that the Europeans will play a role.
Peter, we're here today to reflect on China's role as an ally in the Second World War. How do you think we ensure that that alliance remains strong 80 years on?
Remain? Both? I have some doubt. Because the Western world not really ready to recognize, to accept the reality of the alliance. And we go in a very dangerous sense, because the world is pushed to create the new alliance. But the new alliance could be very, 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 very dangerous. If you look, if Europe is out of the game, what will happen? United States look around to find a new alliance. China, Russia is obliged to look to the new alliance. So that's have to prevent and have to start the dialogue about these questions.
Anna, where do you see relations with China going in the near or longer term?
This is a new world, and we have to keep, but without nostalgia. And the problem of Europeans is that we are full of nostalgia. And we have not to resign to an unruly world full of dangers. And there, of course, China has a key role to play, but the others as well. I mean, we need from Brazil to Indonesia to Africa, to Latin America. And if there is a critical mass, we will be able, because the problem of institutions is that they don't die. Institutions never die. They just stifle. They just become irrelevant. And what are we seeing now? The World Bank has its problem, but we have the Infrastructure Investment Bank. We have the Belt and Road. What do we want? A parallel system that we cannot afford to have two systems and to have all these institutions. I think that we need to, it's not easy, and the institutions have inertia, and it's very complicated, but where there is a will, there is a way.
Peter, you've been a Prime Minister, you've been a leader in international politics. What lessons might today's global leaders draw from China's experience in the 1930s and 40s?
It's not so easy to say what is really to learn, because the situation is fundamentally changed, and the power relations changed, everything changed. But if we can learn something, this is the prevention. To try to prevent all the very bad things. So that's how to prevent by the dialogue. We have to listen the other and to say, okay, I'm convinced that I'm right, but what you say is interesting. Have to thinking about it.
I want to ask you both a final question, if I may. How do you...
May I say what I think that we could do? I mean, to complement what you say. I think that we have to learn from China about resilience. In a world plagued with pandemics and the problem with the environment and all that, resilience is fundamental. And China teaches us from the 30s and the 40s resilience. I think that we have to understand the importance of diplomacy. Frankly, today, let's vindicate diplomacy, because China, in the very difficult circumstances of post-World War II, managed to be there, managed to influence. In very difficult, China did this is also to vindicate diplomacy. You cannot just go just by in today's world by unpredictability and by whims and by all that we know that we unfortunately are.
A very quick final thought from both of you then. How do you think on this 80th anniversary we can prevent history from repeating itself in this increasingly turbulent world of ours? Peter.
We have to understand why happened, and to say, okay, we understand, we know the consequences, and we draw the consequence. 80 years is a lot. Changed fundamentally the world. We have to accept the changes, and we have to adapt the changes and to lead where we go.
Anna.
Well, I think that in the end we have to learn from history and really learn, meaning sheer power is not the alternative. We may have rules that have to be changed, we may have institutions that have to be revamped or reinvented or whatever, but we cannot just go back to the 30s. This is what we learned from China and from the war of resistance in China.
Thank you both. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to bring on our audience again, but a round of applause for our panel. Thank you very much. Usual format, put your hand up, tell us who you are and give us your question, and we'll run a camera and a microphone and even a light to you now. So I'll just take a couple of questions. Gentlemen there, keep your hand up, sir, while we athletically run this microphone to you now. This is the head of operations, who's one of the finest athletes in our newsroom. Welcome.
Good evening. Let me to first apologise for Peter. He's not a well man, and he was overwhelmed on the occasion. So first thing I'll do that. I think most of the time I've listened to the academics, and I believe the academics. But go back to the 1940s when the merchant seaman was deported and taken from the family. Now, most of those people that they married was white. So it's not just a Chinese thing. It's about the children. It's mixed. You've got to find some ways of getting along. They deported people without the knowledge of the families. But we've got to forgive, like everybody else. We'll never move any further if we keep fighting one another. But I will tell you this, and this is my belief. If China pursues its ambitions, and there's nothing wrong with their ambitions, I know who will pay, and it will be the people who look like Chinese in England that will pay the price.
Can I ask you, do you forgive what happened? I mean, we've worked on the documentary together, and I know your story. Do you forgive what happened?
I think I've got to forgive. I don't have a choice. What I would like to do is find my family. I only found out I was 3/4 Chinese. I always thought I was half-caste. That's what you was called when you was Liverpool 8. You was a half-caste. But when we took a DNA, I also found that my mother had 30% Chinese in her. And I found that out through my stepsister because she was white, her father was white. So yes, I think you've got to stand back and you've got to forgive. That's the way life is. If you don't forgive, all you do is build up enemies. And there's no point.
Thank you very much. Round of applause, please. Thank you very much. Very quickly, yeah.
Can I say
Peter, quick word from Peter, yeah.
Yes, thank you. I've been 2 times in Nanjing, and I have seen the memorial, I have seen the museum, and touched me very deeply. Have to teach the young people to understand what happened and what is the horror, and have to see what happened. It's unbelievable. I was very close to crying. That was horrible. And I was very happy that the Chinese government decided to make an exhibition about Nanjing story in Budapest, to learn not only the Chinese people who is around of Nanjing, or he can join very easy, but to teaching the Europeans also what happened there, and that's a moving really.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any more questions in our audience? Lady there, we'll keep your hand up, and we'll run a microphone to you now. Keep your hand up, and one of our younger floor managers, who's much faster, frankly, than the previous floor manager, will get a microphone to you now. Tell us who you are and your question.
Hello, my name's Jude. I'm a playwright, so actually for everyone who's been talking about getting their stories told, just want to give a shout out for theatre. We don't have any money, but we can do a lot with a little, so, you know, talk to us as well. And I'm actually writing a story about the deported sailors, so I've been talking with John and with Joe, with Judy, with Kellyanne, who invited me here this evening. Thank you, Kellyanne. My question is, listening to all of the panellists this evening, I think I've always sort of had this loose idea that peace would come about because somehow we will all magically become similar to each other, like we'll want the same things and we'll have the same values and we'll have the same beliefs. And I think, as a lot of people have pointed out this evening, that's sort of maybe a fallacy, that there are allyships that we have thought are sort of cast iron that are collapsing. There was a really interesting point from one of the brilliant panelists earlier about, you know, Britain sort of has this like vibes-based affinity with Japan that actually, when you look at historical reality, maybe isn't really borne out. You know, at the moment we have a genocide unfolding in Gaza that's been cheered on by various European nations on the basis that we sort of like definitely think the same, even though clearly we don't agree with what's being done. And I guess my question is, if the world is changing, if maybe in this moment it doesn't feel either realistic or idealistic or possible for nations on a nation-to-nation basis to have the same values as each other, to behave in the same way as each other, my question to you panellists is, are there any common values that you think still exist?
Thank you very much.
What are they and what should they be?
Anna, very briefly, please. Thank you.
I think that personally, I mean, this is the big debate, is there are universal values, yes or no? And I think it depends on how deep you go. There is dignity. Dignity is a common sense, it's innate. Then you have civilizations that stress more security, the group, and other, like Western civilizations that stress more the individual and freedom. And this is something that we have to work out. And by the way, we are not inventing anything. This is present in the creation. In post-World War II, where for the first time, we really have an attempt to have a system that everybody can feel comfortable with, which doesn't mean that we have exactly the same approaches to the same to these issues.
Thank you very much. And I have to leave it there, I'm afraid. I know a number of you want to get back in there, but time has ever beaten us. We have to leave things there. It's time for some more refreshments, you'll be delighted to hear, and the chance perhaps to continue these conversations over a drink or two, to rekindle some old friendships and to make some new acquaintances. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for coming to this special event. I'd also like to thank our panellists. Would you give them a round of applause, please? Peter and Anna. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming and being such a wonderful audience. From all of us here, good night.